Thanksgiving had always been a tradition in my family. It wasn't just about the turkey or the stuffing. It was about belonging. It was about knowing that no matter what happened throughout the year, we'd all come together under one roof, laugh over old stories, and pretend, if only for a few hours, that everything was perfect. That's how it used to be. So when my mother called me a few weeks before Thanksgiving, I expected the usual rundown. I imagined her voice, brisk and efficient, rattling off assignments, who was bringing the sweet potatoes, who was in charge of desserts. Maybe she'd ask if I could pick up Dad's favorite wine, the one he always pretended not to care about but would subtly nurse throughout the evening. I was ready for all of it. What I wasn't ready for was the way she sounded. Light, almost rehearsed, as if she had been practicing this call in the mirror, smoothing out the rough edges, making sure she got it just right. Honey, we need to talk about Thanksgiving. There was a flicker of something warm inside me, something foolishly hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, this was her way of extending an olive branch. My parents and I had been at odds for a while, dancing around the cracks in our relationship but never fully addressing them. Maybe this was the beginning of a change. Of course, I said, forcing brightness into my voice. What's the plan? Silence, just for a beat too long. Then, she cleared her throat. Well, this year is going to be a little different. I frowned, waiting for her to continue. Your father and I thought it would be best to keep things smaller this time. Smaller? Yes. You know, just a more intimate gathering. Less stress, less chaos. A strange unease crept up my spine. I glanced at the calendar on the fridge, my kids' scribbled drawings overlapping reminders of parent-teacher conferences and soccer practice. Thanksgiving had never been chaotic. It had always been predictable, controlled, because that's how my parents liked it. Okay, I said slowly. So what does that mean? Another pause. Then, her voice came, carefully measured. Jake and Olivia won't be coming this year. At first, I thought I misheard her. Wait, what? It's just, with everything going on, we thought it would be better to keep the guest list limited. Everything going on? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Jake was 10. Olivia was 7. They weren't guests. They were family. Mom, what are you talking about? It's Thanksgiving. They've been there every year. I know, honey, but things are different now. We just want a peaceful holiday. A peaceful holiday, I repeated, my voice flat. And then, just as I was trying to process that blow, she twisted the knife. Vanessa will be there. I felt my jaw tighten. Vanessa? Yes. And her husband. And his children. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at it as if it had betrayed me. Maybe I had stepped into some alternate reality. Maybe this was a joke, some elaborate prank meant to test my patience. But my mother's silence told me it wasn't. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice eerily calm. You have room for Vanessa. You have room for her new husband and his kids. But not for my children? Oh, don't make this into something dramatic, she sighed, the irritation creeping into her tone. It's just easier this way. Easier for who? For everyone, she insisted. We just want things to be smooth. No tension, no awkwardness. No tension, no awkwardness. Translation. Know me. Know my kids. I ran a hand down my face, forcing myself to breathe. So let me get this straight, I said again, this time slower, making sure every word landed. You're telling me that my children, your grandchildren, aren't welcome at your Thanksgiving table. But Vanessa's stepkids, who you've known for what, 2 years? They are. They're part of the family now, too, my mother said, as if that somehow justified it. And my kids aren't? That's not what I'm saying. It's exactly what you're saying. Silence. I don't understand why you're getting so worked up over this, she said finally, exasperation thick in her voice. It's just one holiday. I let out a short, humorless laugh. No, Mom. It's not just one holiday. It's a choice. And you made yours. Oh, for heaven's sake, she muttered. I'm not going to argue about this. If you don't want to come, that's your decision. No, I said, gripping the phone tighter. You already made the decision for me. And just like that, the conversation was over. She hung up first, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. I stood there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling something heavy settle in my chest. My parents had made it clear where their loyalties lay. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't have a place at their table anymore. Neither did my kids. But maybe, just maybe, that was their loss. It wasn't just about Thanksgiving. That was the moment of clarity, the final slap in the face. But the truth was, this had been brewing for years. I sat in the dim glow of my living room, phone still in my hand, replaying my mother's words over and over. It's just one holiday. But that wasn't true, was it? This wasn't just about a single dinner or a guest list. It was about something bigger, something that had been in front of me all along, but I had been too blind or too hopeful to acknowledge. Vanessa had always been their favorite. Even when we were married, it was clear my parents adored her. It had been flattering, at first. I had foolishly believed that their love for her was an extension of their love for me, that having her around meant my parents were proud of my choice, of the life I had built. But the cracks started to show when our marriage fell apart. She was the one who left. She was the one who decided that our vows, our history, our children, our family, weren't enough for her. And yet, somehow, in my parents' eyes, I had been the one to disrupt the peace. I had seen it in the little things. The way they still invited her over for coffee long after the divorce. The way they downplayed the pain I had gone through. The nights I spent staring at the ceiling, wondering how I was going to raise 2 kids alone. The way they seemed to excuse every choice she made while scrutinizing mine. And now this. Now, they were telling me outright that my children, weren't as important as her new husband's kids. I set my phone down, pressing my fingers against my temples as I tried to contain the rising frustration. Rachel walked in, holding a steaming mug of tea, her expression wary. She had been in the kitchen when I took the call, pretending not to listen but catching every word. "They really said that?" she asked softly, handing me the mug. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Jake and Olivia aren't welcome. But Vanessa and her new family? Open arms." Rachel let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. Unbelievable. I stared at the surface of the tea, watching the ripples. I didn't even want the damn tea. I just wanted something to hold, something to ground me. "It's not just about Thanksgiving," I muttered, mostly to myself. Rachel sat beside me, tucking her legs under her. "I know." I ran a hand down my face. "They barely come to Jake's soccer games. They miss Olivia's school performances. But they're always at Vanessa's stepkids events. And every time I bring it up, I'm overreacting." Rachel reached for my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "You're not overreacting." I exhaled slowly. "I just don't get it. I'm their son. Those are their grandkids. Why do they treat us like an afterthought?" Rachel hesitated before answering, choosing her words carefully. Maybe they just don't want to admit they picked sides a long time ago." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She sighed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I think, in their minds, if they acknowledge how unfair they've been to you, then they have to face the fact that they've been wrong this whole time. And some people, especially parents, hate admitting when they've screwed up." I wanted to argue, to find some logical explanation for all of this, but the truth settled in my chest like a weight. Rachel was right. My parents had made their choice a long time ago. I just hadn't wanted to see it. "So what are you going to do?" she asked. I let out a slow breath. "I don't know, but I know what I'm not going to do." Rachel tilted her head. "Which is?" "I'm not going to pretend this is okay anymore." Because that was the thing, wasn't it? For years, I had swallowed the frustration, made excuses for them, played the part of the dutiful son, hoping they would come around. But they weren't going to. They had made their priorities clear, and I was done trying to earn a place at their table. I glanced at the clock. It was late. The kids were asleep upstairs, unaware of the quiet storm brewing in my head. But they would know soon enough. They would notice when we didn't go to Thanksgiving this year, when I stopped trying to drag my parents into their lives. And maybe, years from now, when they were older, they would understand that I had made this choice for them. "They're going to call again," Rachel murmured. "They're going to try to guilt you into showing up?" I nodded. "Probably." "What are you going to say?" I looked up at her, my jaw tightening. I'm going to tell them the truth. And I meant it. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg them to love my children the way they deserve to be loved. I was just going to state the facts, plain and simple. If my kids aren't welcome, then neither am I. And if that meant losing my parents, then so be it. Because I wasn't going to let my kids grow up feeling like second-class family members. They deserved better. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to give it to them. 4 years, I had been the dependable son. The one who answered their calls at all hours. The one who showed up when the gutters needed cleaning, when the air conditioning broke in the middle of summer, when Dad's car wouldn't start. I had been the one they leaned on when my younger brother, Adam, was too busy or too indifferent to be bothered. I had always been there, even when they weren't there for me. Not anymore. I let their calls go to voicemail. The first few were expected. My mother, using her usual soft yet condescending tone, telling me I was being unreasonable. My father, ever the diplomat, trying to smooth things over by not really addressing anything at all. Son, you know how your mother gets. Just let it go. Come to Thanksgiving. It's tradition. Tradition. I stared at the phone, the word echoing in my mind. What did that even mean anymore? It had been tradition for my kids to be there, sitting at that long wooden table, eating too much mashed potatoes and laughing at Grandpa's terrible jokes. It had been tradition for them to run around the backyard with their cousins after dinner, for Olivia to sit on Grandma's lap while she dozed off in front of the football game. But apparently, some traditions could be broken when it was convenient. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. Rachel noticed, of course. She always did. You're really not going to answer them? She asked one night as we sat on the couch, the TV on but neither of us really watching it. No. She studied me for a moment before nodding. Good. That was the thing about Rachel. She didn't try to tell me to make peace or be the bigger person. She didn't tell me to forgive them for my own sake. She just got it. It didn't mean the silence didn't bother me. It did. More than I wanted to admit. The first week, it felt unnatural. Like I was walking around with a missing limb, constantly reaching for something that wasn't there. I kept expecting my phone to ring. Kept expecting my father's voice, calm and even, telling me to be rational. My mother's, guilt-ridden but never apologetic, trying to lure me back in. By the second week, the weight started to shift. The absence of their voices became lighter, quieter. I didn't flinch when my phone buzzed. I didn't check my messages, expecting another attempt to pull me back in. I started to feel free. And then, Thanksgiving arrived. We weren't at my parents' house, surrounded by forced smiles and underlying tension. We weren't pretending everything was fine, sitting across from Vanessa and her picture-perfect new family. We were at home. Rachel cooked, nothing fancy, just enough to make it feel special. The kids helped, their small hands making a mess of the dough for the dinner rolls, their laughter filling every empty space in the house. Jake set the table, placing mismatched plates carefully in front of each seat. Olivia made decorations, drawing turkeys and pumpkins on construction paper, taping them to the walls. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't elaborate, but it was ours. Dad, can we do this every year? Jake asked as he piled his plate with food. I looked at him, at the pure, simple joy on his face. He wasn't missing anything. He wasn't thinking about where we should have been. He was just happy to be here, with me. I smiled. Yeah, buddy. We can. For the first time in years, Thanksgiving felt right. No tension. No favoritism. No walking on eggshells, waiting for the inevitable moment when my parents said something dismissive or hurtful. It was just us. 3 days later, the peace shattered with one phone call. Adam, Mom and Dad are freaking out. What the hell did you do? I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. I didn't do anything, Adam. I just didn't show up. Yeah, well, they're acting like you burned the house down. Of course they were. My absence wasn't just an empty chair at the table. It was a statement. One they didn't like. They're saying you cut them off completely, Adam continued. I scoffed. They cut me off first. Look, man, I get why you're mad, but is this really worth it? That was the question, wasn't it? Was it worth it? The distance, the severed ties, the uncertainty of what came next? I thought about Jake and Olivia, laughing in our kitchen, unbothered by what they didn't even know they had lost. I thought about the years of being sidelined, dismissed, treated like an afterthought in my own family. Yeah, I said, my voice steady. It's worth it. Adam sighed. You're really not going to try to fix this? There's nothing to fix. So that's it? You're just done with them? I hesitated. Was I? I didn't know. Maybe this was temporary. Maybe they would come around. Or maybe I would cave. But at that moment, standing in my quiet living room, phone pressed to my ear, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be the one to fix it. Not this time. If they want to talk, they can call me. And not to guilt me, not to gaslight me, not to pretend they did nothing wrong. If they want to actually talk, I'll listen. Adam was silent for a long moment. Okay, he said finally, but don't expect that call anytime soon. I let out a breath. Yeah, I know. And I was okay with that. For the first time, I really truly was. A week before Thanksgiving, my phone rang again. I almost didn't answer. By then, I had gotten used to letting their calls go straight to voicemail, used to the peace that came with silence. But something about this time, maybe curiosity, maybe some lingering sense of obligation, made me pick up. I really hope you'll reconsider, my mother started, skipping the pleasantries altogether. No hello, no how are the kids, just straight to business. Her voice was smooth, practiced, like she had been rehearsing this speech all morning. I leaned against the kitchen counter, rubbing the bridge of my nose. We've been over this, Mom. I know, she said, her tone softening. I just think we shouldn't let one disagreement ruin the holiday. I almost laughed. One disagreement? This wasn't just about Thanksgiving, and we both knew it. But before I could say that, she kept talking. By the way, she added, her voice casual, like she was tossing out an afterthought. Did you cancel the credit card? I froze. The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet, the hum of the fridge louder than it should have been. What credit card? I asked slowly, even though I already had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. A pause. Then, she cleared her throat. The one your father and I have been using. I stood up straighter. What? For essentials, she said quickly. My grip tightened on the phone. Mom, what are you talking about? What credit card? She hesitated. The one you gave us a while back. Something sharp and cold settled in my stomach. You mean my credit card? The one I added you to temporarily when Dad was in the hospital? Another pause. Longer this time. Then, in a clipped tone, yes. I felt like I had been sucker punched. That had been years ago. Back when my father had his health scare. When I had been so worried about them being able to afford medical expenses that I added them to one of my cards. I had meant for it to be temporary, just until Dad got better, just to help. I had forgotten about it completely, but they hadn't. They had been using it this whole time. I turned, pacing the length of the kitchen, my pulse thudding in my ears. How long have you been using it? It's not a big deal. How long? I snapped. Silence. Then, finally, since you gave it to us. I let out a slow, measured breath. My hands were shaking, but not from shock, from anger. And you didn't think to mention that at any point? We didn't think it was a problem, she said quickly. We assumed you knew. It's not like we've been reckless, just the occasional grocery run, a few things for the house. I walked over to my laptop and pulled up my banking app. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just groceries. It wasn't just a few things for the house. There were hundreds of transactions. Fancy restaurants, online shopping, hotel stays. My own parents had been stealing from me for years. You assumed I knew? I repeated, my voice dangerously low. It's not like you've ever needed the money, she said, as if that justified it. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. So because I didn't struggle, you figured you were entitled to my bank account? Don't be dramatic, she scoffed. It's just money. Just money. Funny how it was always just money, when it wasn't theirs. Well, you don't have to worry about it anymore, I said, my voice cold. Because I just canceled the card. The change in her tone was immediate. You what? I canceled it, I repeated. You won't be using my money anymore. Her breath hitched. But nothing, Mom. You stole from me. Oh, don't be ridiculous. Stealing is taking something without permission. I cut in. Did I ever tell you it was okay to keep using that card? She was silent. That's what I thought. For the first time in the conversation, I heard something crack in her voice. You're seriously doing this? You're going to cut us off over something so small? Small? I scoffed. Mom, you took thousands of dollars from me, behind my back, and now you want to play the victim? We're family, she cried. Yeah, and maybe that used to mean something. Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then, in a voice that was colder than I had ever heard from her, you'll regret this. I let out a slow exhale, gripping the phone tightly. No, Mom, I won't. Then, for the second time that month, I hung up on my mother. I stood there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling a strange mix of anger, relief, and sadness all at once. Rachel walked in a few minutes later, her brows furrowing when she saw my face. What happened? She asked. I turned to her, shaking my head, still processing. They've been using my credit card this whole time. Her eyes widened. What? Yeah, I muttered. For years. She inhaled sharply. Please tell me you canceled it. Immediately. Rachel let out a low whistle, shaking her head. Wow. And I'm guessing they didn't take it well? I let out a humorless laugh. Mom basically told me I'd regret it. Rachel's expression hardened. You won't. I sighed, running a hand down my face. Yeah, I know. And for the first time, I really truly meant it. Thanksgiving came and went without so much as a whisper from my parents. No last-minute calls, no attempts to guilt me into showing up. The silence was deafening, and I was fine with it. Or at least, I told myself I was. Instead of the usual formal dinner at my parents' house, I spent the day in my own home with Rachel, Jake, and Olivia. It was different. Not the grand, overly polished meal I had grown up with, but something simpler, warmer. Rachel made her famous mashed potatoes, Olivia insisted on stirring the gravy, and Jake nearly set the kitchen on fire when he tried to help with the rolls. We laughed, we ate, and we made our own tradition. No forced conversations. No underhanded comments. No lingering feeling that I was somehow the disappointment in the room. I should have felt free. But 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Adam. Mom and Dad are freaking out. What the hell did you do? I almost laughed. Of course. What do you mean? What did I do? I shot back. I didn't do anything. I just didn't show up. Yeah, well, they're acting like you burned the house down, he said, sighing. I sat down on the couch, rubbing my temples. Why am I not surprised? They're saying you cut them off completely, Adam continued. I scoffed. They cut me off first. Look, man, Adam said, his voice shifting to something almost pleading. I get why you're mad, but is this really worth it? Cutting them off completely? I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to snap. You think this is just about Thanksgiving? You think this is about one dinner? I don't know, maybe? Adam said, frustration creeping into his voice. They're Mom and Dad. They're not perfect, but they raised us. I inhaled slowly, my patience hanging by a thread. They raised us, yeah. And then they decided Vanessa's new family was more important than mine. They took my money for years, Adam. And now that I've stopped playing along, they're the ones playing the victims. Silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing, could practically picture him rubbing his forehead like he always did when he was thinking. I'm not saying they're right, he admitted, but they're still our parents. Yeah? And what exactly does that mean, Adam? My voice was calm, but cold. Does that mean I just roll over every time they cross a line? Does that mean I just pretend this didn't happen, keep giving them what they want so they don't throw a tantrum? I just don't want to see this turn into something we can't come back from. I let out a breath, shaking my head. That's the thing, Adam. I didn't do this. They did. Another long pause. So that's it? You're just done with them? I hesitated. Was I? I didn't know. Maybe this was temporary. Maybe they'd come around. Or maybe I would cave. But at that moment, standing in my quiet living room, phone pressed to my ear, I knew one thing for sure. I'm done being the only one trying. Adam sighed. You know they're never going to apologize, right? I know. So what's the point? The point, I said slowly, is that I don't have to keep pretending everything is fine just because they're too proud to admit they were wrong. He let out a dry laugh. You always were the stubborn one. Yeah, well, I muttered, guess I finally learned it from them. I could hear the conflict in his voice, the part of him that wanted to defend them and the part of him that knew I wasn't wrong. They're gonna be pissed, he finally said. Let them be. A pause. All right, man. I'll talk to you later. Yeah. I hung up, tossing my phone onto the coffee table and leaning back against the couch. Rachel walked in, holding 2 mugs of coffee, and handed me one without a word. Adam? She asked knowingly. I nodded, blowing on the coffee before taking a sip. What did he say? The usual, I muttered. They're freaking out. I should be the bigger person. Blah, blah, blah. Rachel smirked. And what did you say? That I'm done playing their game. She nodded approvingly. Good. I exhaled, staring at the ceiling. Then why does it still feel like I lost? Rachel set her coffee down and scooted closer, her hand resting on my knee. Because you still care. I let out a humorless laugh. Yeah, guess that's the problem. Huh? She squeezed my knee gently. You did the right thing. Then why does it feel so damn hard? Because walking away from family, even when they hurt you, is never easy, she said softly. But that doesn't mean it's not necessary. I let her words sink in, the weight of them pressing against my chest. She was right. I was grieving something I had never really had. A family that put me and my kids first. A family that saw me as more than just someone to take advantage of. It was a loss. But maybe, just maybe, it was also a beginning. I took another sip of my coffee, exhaling slowly. Yeah, I said, more to myself than to her. I guess you're right. And this time, I really hoped I believed it. December arrived, bringing with it a sharp chill in the air and a tension I couldn't shake. I should have been enjoying the season, buying gifts for the kids, decorating the house, indulging in Rachel's obsession with holiday movies. But instead, I was staring at an envelope that had been slipped into my mailbox. A letter. A legal letter. Rachel found it first, standing in the kitchen, flipping through the stack of mail. At first, she didn't think much of it, until she saw the sender's name. You might want to take a look at this. I set my coffee down and took the envelope from her, my stomach tightening as I read the return address. It was from my parents, or rather, from their lawyer. I tore it open, scanning the contents quickly. At first, I thought it had to be a joke, a mistake. But as I read the words over and over, my chest grew tight with anger. They were demanding reimbursement. An itemized list of expenses. Food, clothes, school supplies, medical bills. Everything they had ever spent on me growing up, tallied up and neatly presented in black and white. Nearly $100,000. Rachel snatched the letter from my hands, her eyes widening as she read it. Are they serious? She breathed. I let out a humorless laugh, running a hand through my hair. Oh, they're serious. They're demanding money for raising you? Rachel asked, shaking her head in disbelief. Yep. She stared at me, waiting for me to say something, to react. But I just stood there, gripping the counter, trying to process the sheer insanity of what I was holding. Rachel dropped the letter onto the table. Okay. No. This is insane. Parents don't bill their kids for existing. Yeah, well, mine do. I picked up the letter again, my eyes narrowing at the closing paragraph. If payment is not received, we will be forced to take legal action to recover these costs. I let out another dry laugh. They're actually threatening to sue me. Rachel's mouth fell open. This is next level insane. I nodded, exhaling slowly. I wasn't even surprised at this point. First, they threw my kids aside. Then, they took my money behind my back. And now, when I finally put my foot down, they wanted to charge me for existing? It was pathetic. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Without a word, I grabbed my car keys. Rachel crossed her arms. Where are you going? To handle this. And by handle, you mean? Exactly what it sounds like. Rachel sighed, rubbing her forehead. Do I need to remind you that people who send legal letters don't usually respond well to confrontations? Good, I muttered, because I'm not looking for a response. I'm looking for an answer. She gave me a wary look, but didn't stop me. She knew better. 20 minutes later, I was standing on my parents' front porch, gripping the letter in one hand, my other fist clenched at my side. I knocked. Hard. After a few moments, the door swung open, and my father stood there, his expression unreadable. I figured you'd show up, he said, stepping aside to let me in. I walked in, my heart pounding, the familiar scent of their house triggering something deep and bitter inside me. My mother was in the living room, pretending to be surprised by my arrival. Oh, honey, we weren't expecting you. I held up the letter, shaking it slightly. Really? Because this sure as hell says otherwise. She sighed dramatically. You're overreacting. Overreacting? I interrupted, my voice sharp. You sent me a bill. A bill, Mom. For being your son. My father folded his arms. It's not unreasonable. We gave you a life. We made sacrifices. It's only fair that you give back. I laughed bitterly. Give back? That's rich, coming from you. You've taken from me for years. And now you want to act like I owe you something? We don't expect you to understand, my mother said, shaking her head. You've always been ungrateful. That hit a nerve. I took a slow step forward, my voice low and controlled. Ungrateful? You want to talk about ungrateful? Let's do that. Let's talk about how I took care of you when Dad was sick. How I paid for things without asking for anything in return. How I let you use my credit card because I trusted you. And what did you do? You stole from me. You treated my kids like they didn't matter. And now, because I finally said enough, you're trying to squeeze more out of me? They were quiet. For the first time, they had no excuse. This isn't about money, I continued. This is about control. You hate that I walked away. You hate that I'm not bending over backward to please you anymore. And this? I held up the letter. This is your last pathetic attempt at trying to make me come crawling back. My mother crossed her arms. So what are you going to do? Cut us off? Never speak to us again? Is that what you want? I exhaled, shaking my head. I wanted a family. My voice was quieter now, but firm. But I can't keep chasing people who don't actually care about me. I walked to the coffee table, ripped the letter in half, and let the pieces fall onto the floor. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's face twisted in shock. Consider that my answer, I said. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because I already knew this was the end. And I was finally free. A week before Christmas, the manipulation started again. At first, it was subtle. A text from my mother, short and sweet, as if the last few months hadn't happened. We forgive you. Come to Christmas dinner and let's move past this. I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the screen. Forgive me? Like I was the one who needed forgiveness? I didn't respond. I deleted the message and went on with my day. But they didn't stop. The next day, Adam called. Just let it go, man, he said the moment I answered. Let what go? I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. All of this. Mom and Dad are willing to move on. Why can't you? I let out a sharp laugh. Move on? You mean pretend none of this happened? Just show up and act like they didn't throw me and my kids aside? Adam sighed. Look, I get it. What they did was messed up. But is it really worth ruining the family over? Adam, they ruined the family. Not me. Yeah, but you're the one keeping this fight going, he argued. I gritted my teeth. So what? I just let them get away with it? I'm not saying that, he said carefully. I just think maybe it's time to be the bigger person. I am the bigger person, I shot back. That's why I'm not putting up with their crap anymore. Adam didn't have a response for that. Look, I said, exhaling. You do whatever you want. Go to Christmas dinner. Pretend everything's fine. But I'm done playing that game. He was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, he said, All right, man. I don't want this to be permanent. Neither do I admitted. But I'm not the one who needs to fix it. When I hung up, I felt the usual mixture of frustration and exhaustion. I knew Adam wasn't trying to be the bad guy. He just didn't want to be in the middle of it. But that's the problem, isn't it? People always want to smooth things over without addressing the actual damage. But I wasn't interested in smoothing things over. And I sure as hell wasn't interested in letting them rewrite the story to make themselves the victims. Still, I wasn't prepared for what happened on Christmas Eve. It was just after dark when I heard the knock at the door. Rachel was in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on the cookies we baked with the kids. Jake and Olivia were in the living room, curled up in blankets, watching Home Alone for the 100th time. Everything was calm, cozy, exactly how I wanted it. Then I opened the door, and there they were, my parents, standing on my doorstep, with gifts for my kids. I blinked, caught between disbelief and irritation. "What are you doing here?" My mother smiled, as if she hadn't spent the last 2 months treating me like I was the villain in her story. "We wanted to see the kids." "It's Christmas Eve," my father added, as if that explained everything. I stared at them, my grip tightening on the doorknob. "You had your chance to be in their lives," I said evenly. "And you made your choice." My mother's smile faltered. "Oh, don't be dramatic, sweetheart. We just want to give them their presents." "No," I said simply. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated, stepping outside and shutting the door behind me so the kids wouldn't hear. "You don't get to use gifts to weasel your way back in. That's not how this works." "Oh, for God's sake," my father muttered, shaking his head. "Is this really necessary?" "You tell me," I said, "because a few weeks ago, you were threatening to sue me, and now you want to play the doting grandparents?" My mother sighed, pressing a hand to her chest like she was the one suffering. "Can't we just move past all of that?" "Past what?" I asked, tilting my head. "The part where you stole from me? The part where you threw my kids aside? The part where you tried to charge me for being born?" My mother's lips tightened. "You always make everything so dramatic." I let out a short laugh. "Yeah? Well, you always make everything about you." They stood there, staring at me, waiting for me to cave, to give in like I always did. But I wasn't that person anymore. "Go home," I said. My mother's eyes widened. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "Go home. But the kids are fine without you." Her face twisted in anger. "You're being cruel." "No," I said, my voice calm. "Cruel is what you did. I'm just holding you accountable for it." My father exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You're making a mistake." I met his gaze, steady and unshaken. "No, Dad. I'm finally making the right choice." I didn't give them a chance to argue. I turned, walked inside, and shut the door. Rachel was standing by the kitchen, watching me carefully. "You okay?" she asked. I let out a slow breath. "Yeah. Do you think they'll come back?" I glanced at the door, feeling nothing but cold indifference. "Doesn't matter. Because they already lost." And this time, I wasn't looking back. I thought that was the end of it. I had shut the door. I had made my stance clear. I had cut them off, for real this time. But if there was one thing I should have known by now, it was that my parents didn't take rejection lightly. They weren't done. They never were. New Year's Eve was supposed to be a fresh start, a clean slate. I wanted to leave all of this behind. Wanted to focus on my kids, on Rachel, on the life I was building without them. And for a while, it seemed like I would. Then came the knock on the door. Not my parents this time. Adam. I sighed before even opening the door. I already knew what this was. I pulled it open to find him standing there, hands shoved into his pockets, looking both annoyed and exhausted. "Can we talk?" he asked. "That depends," I said, crossing my arms. "Are you here as my brother, or as Mom and Dad's messenger?" He sighed, running a hand down his face. "Look, man, this is serious." "So was the last time they pulled something," I said flatly. "Why do I get the feeling this is just more of the same?" Adam hesitated. Then he pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to me. I didn't even have to open it to know what it was. I could feel it in my gut. "They wouldn't," I muttered, even as I unfolded the paper, scanning the words that confirmed what I already knew. A legal notice. They were filing for grandparents' rights. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. They're actually trying to take me to court? Adam looked pained. They just want to see the kids. Bullshit. I snapped the paper shut and shoved it into my pocket. They don't give a damn about the kids. They just want control. It's not like that, man. Then what is it like, Adam? My voice rose. They threw my kids aside for Vanessa's new family. They stole from me for years. And now, because I finally walked away, they're trying to force their way back in through the courts? They're scared, he muttered. I stared at him. Scared of what? Of losing you, Adam admitted. Of losing the kids. They think if they don't do this now, they'll never see them again. That was their choice, I said, my voice sharp. Not mine. Come on, man, Adam groaned. They're not monsters. No? I scoffed. Because suing your own son for access to grandkids you couldn't even bother to invite to Thanksgiving sure sounds like something a monster would do. Adam let out a breath. Just think about it. That's all I'm asking. Maybe a compromise, supervised visits, something? No. Adam blinked. Just like that? Yes, just like that. I stepped back, gripping the door handle. If they wanted to be in my kids' lives, they should have acted like it before now. But they didn't. They made their choice and I made mine. This? The lawsuit? It's just another way to manipulate me. And I'm done. Adam stared at me for a long moment. Then he sighed and shook his head. I hope you know what you're doing. I do, I said firmly. For once in my life, I really do. I shut the door. And this time, I didn't look back. The next day, I met with a lawyer. She was sharp, direct, and didn't sugarcoat anything. I like that. They don't have a case, she told me. Grandparents' rights vary by state, but in situations like this, where you're an involved, present parent with no history of neglect or abuse, judges almost never side with the grandparents. They'd have to prove that cutting them off is harming the children in some way. Which they can't, I said. She nodded. Exactly. Still, we need to be prepared. If they push this, it could get messy. I exhaled, rubbing my jaw. I'm ready. And I meant it. For once, I wasn't afraid of their threats. I wasn't scared of the guilt they tried to throw at me. I wasn't a little boy desperate for their approval anymore. I was a man protecting his family, and I would fight them with everything I had. 2 weeks later, my lawyer sent their attorney a response. It was short, direct, and it made one thing very, very clear. If they wanted to take me to court, I was ready. And I wouldn't just be defending myself. I would be countersuing for fraud, unauthorized credit card use, and emotional distress. It didn't take long for them to back down after that. Adam called me a few days later. They dropped it, he said, sounding drained. Good. Dad's pissed, he added. Mom won't stop crying. That's not my problem, I said. I know, Adam sighed. But you really think this is the end? I glanced out the window, watching Jake and Olivia chase each other around the yard. Rachel was sitting on the porch, sipping tea, her eyes flicking toward me every now and then, making sure I was okay. Yeah, I said finally. I do. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. Weeks passed with no calls, no texts, no sudden visits. It was strange at first, the silence. For years, my parents had been a constant presence, sometimes welcome, mostly unwanted. But now, it was as if they had finally realized I wasn't going to play their game anymore. And I wasn't. For the first time, I could breathe. I could wake up without dreading some passive-aggressive message. I could enjoy my mornings with Rachel, making pancakes for Jake and Olivia, watching them laugh without that lingering bitterness in the back of my mind. I was free. And yet, there was still that nagging part of me, that little voice that whispered, what if this really is it? What if you never hear from them again? I wasn't sure if that was a bad thing. But then, Adam called. I don't know why I'm even trying, he said, his voice heavy. Then don't, I replied simply. Mom and Dad miss you. I scoffed. They miss having control over me. Come on, man, Adam sighed. It's not like that. Then what is it like, Adam? I challenged. Because from where I'm standing, they treated my kids like they didn't matter. They stole from me. They tried to sue me, and now, because they lost, they suddenly miss me? They do. No, they miss what I did for them, I said. They miss the money. The errands. The free labor. They miss having a son they could manipulate. But they don't miss me. Adam was quiet for a moment. You really believe that? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Yeah, I do. Then I guess this is it, Adam said quietly. Guess so. That sucks. Not for me, I said. Adam exhaled heavily. All right, man. Take care of yourself. You too. And that was the last time we spoke. The next few months felt like I was waking up from a fog. Everything was lighter. I didn't realize how much weight I had been carrying until it was gone. I focused on my kids, on Rachel, on building something real, something stable. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next explosion. And it felt good. Better than I ever expected. Spring arrived, bringing warmer days, longer nights. One afternoon, I was sitting on the porch, watching Jake and Olivia chase each other across the yard. Rachel sat beside me, her hand warm in mine. She glanced at me, a small smile playing on her lips. You look different, she said. I raised an eyebrow. Different how? Lighter. I let out a breath. Yeah, I feel lighter. She squeezed my hand. Think they'll ever try again? I watched the kids, their laughter filling the air. Doesn't matter, I said. They already lost. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. Spring had always been my favorite season. Something about it felt like a reset, a clean slate. The world stretching itself awake after months of cold and gloom, like it was shaking off everything heavy and suffocating. That's how I felt now, lighter, freer, like I had finally shed the weight of something I should have let go of a long time ago. It had been months since my last conversation with Adam. Months since my parents had tried one last time to force their way back into my life. And despite everything, the anger, the hurt, the sheer absurdity of it all, I was at peace. Really, truly at peace. And yet, as I sat on the porch with a cold drink in hand, watching Jake and Olivia race across the yard, I couldn't help but wonder if they'd ever try again. If one day, I'd look at my phone and see my mother's name on the screen, pretending none of it had ever happened. If my father would suddenly decide that pride wasn't worth losing a son. If Adam would come back, still stuck in the middle, still trying to convince me that I was the one being unreasonable. Penny for your thoughts? Rachel's voice pulled me back, and I glanced over to see her watching me carefully. You already know, I muttered, taking a sip of my drink. She nodded. Still thinking about them? Not in the way you think, I admitted. It's just weird, you know? After years of all that chaos, all that drama, just nothing. Rachel hummed in understanding. It's because you were always the one putting in the effort. The moment you stopped, everything fell apart. I let her words settle. She was right. I had been the one holding it all together. The one making the calls, showing up, keeping the relationship alive. But the moment I walked away, it had crumbled. Because they had never truly valued me, only what I did for them. I think part of me always believed they'd realize they were wrong, I admitted. That they'd wake up one day and try to fix things. But they didn't. They never will, Rachel said softly. I exhaled slowly, nodding. And I had finally made my peace with that. That evening, after the kids had showered and settled in with their books, Rachel and I sat curled up on the couch, a soft blanket draped over us. Do you ever regret it? She asked suddenly. Regret what? Cutting them off. I was quiet for a moment, thinking, did I regret it? There had been moments, fleeting, quiet moments, where doubt had crept in, where I had wondered if I was being too harsh. If maybe, just maybe, I should have handled things differently. But then I'd remember Thanksgiving. I'd remember the credit card. I'd remember the lawsuit. I'd remember the way they had dismissed my kids like they were strangers while welcoming Vanessa's new family with open arms. And suddenly, there was no doubt left. No, I said firmly. I don't regret it. Rachel nodded, her fingers tracing absent patterns on my arm. You did the right thing, she said, her voice steady. For yourself. For Jake and Olivia. I know. And I did. For once, I knew I had made the right choice. 4 years, I had been the dutiful son. The one who bent over backward to keep the peace. The one who took the hits and smiled through the hurt. Not anymore. I had broken free. And I wasn't looking back. Spring stretched into summer, and with it came a new sense of normal. No more waiting for the other shoe to drop. No more second-guessing my decisions. I focused on what mattered. Weekend trips with the kids. Lazy Sunday mornings with Rachel. Evenings spent laughing over dinner, feeling present in a way I hadn't in years. One night, as I tucked Olivia into bed, she blinked up at me sleepily. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby? Are we gonna go to Grandma and Grandpa's house ever again?" The question caught me off guard, but I kept my expression calm. "Do you miss them?" I asked carefully. She thought for a moment, then shrugged. "Not really. Just wondering." I smoothed a hand over her hair. "No, sweetheart. We're not going back." "Okay." She yawned, rolling onto her side. No sadness. No disappointment. Just acceptance. And as I turned off the light and stepped into the hallway, I realized something. This wasn't just my fresh start. It was theirs too. A new beginning. A life without the weight of people who didn't deserve us. And for the first time, I wasn't just okay with that. I was grateful for it. Because in the end, they were the ones who lost us. And that was their burden to carry, not mine.